Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. Shakespeare talked about something that was full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Well, that's what happened with that off election down in Georgia. An off election for one congressional seat. The Dems put in $8 million, count them, $8 million, and almost all of it, almost every single dollar came from out of state to try to put in a Democrat in an off election. And in order to have a clear win, he had to get over 50% of the vote. He didn't get it. And so when the Republicans come together against him in the general election, the chances are that he will get beat. So.
That's right. It was quite much ado about nothing, right?
Much ado about nothing. Full of sound and fury. But I understand CNN is jumping for joy. What is wrong with CNN? They really screwed up.
I think they wanted victory so bad that in their minds it is a victory.
Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I know so much about the early days. Ted Turner, we used to be friends. I don't know what he's doing now besides raising buffaloes, but anyhow, his idea of a newscast, this is a true story. He got a dog, and he fed the dog peanut butter, and then he put the dog on close-up camera, and the dog was doing this with the peanut butter, and he had a guy reading the news off screen. This is true. This was their view of a newscast. This is the early days of CNN, and it's a joke what they're doing. But anyhow, the cable news have become so biased, and it's just ridiculous. So
you know that district down in Georgia that was once home, Newt Gingrich's home. That district had been held also by Congressman Tom Price, who is now the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Now the race is headed for a runoff, and Republicans will be favored to win. Heather Sells has the story.
Both parties see the seat held by former Congressman Tom Price as a test, an early indicator of what lies ahead in the 2018 congressional midterm elections. Democrats are trying to make it a referendum on the president.
When President Trump embarrasses our country or acts recklessly, I'll hold him accountable.
Democratic candidate Jon Ossoff was up against 11 Republican candidates last night, but failed to get the necessary 50% of the vote to avoid a runoff election. That pits him against top vote-getter Karen Handel in June. Ossoff is a former congressional staffer, and Handel a former Georgia Secretary of State.
Handel is also a former executive with the Susan Komen Foundation that fights breast cancer, and she took political heat in 2012 for a decision to stop funding Planned Parenthood.
This was a premeditated, orchestrated attack on a breast cancer organization.
She told CBN News that Komen was looking for neutral ground and noticed that Planned Parenthood didn't perform mammograms, but merely referred them out. Last night, Handel told a Georgia crowd that she'll fight for their values, including those on health care. And she clearly tied her opponent to the National Democratic Party.
It's a choice between the views and values of a proven, independent, and conservative leader who has delivered for the people of this district and this state, or a Democrat who Nancy Pelosi hopes is going to deliver for her.
Ossoff will no doubt try to capitalize on anti-Trump energy among Democrats while appealing to moderate Republicans in the conservative district.
Let's show what people power is all about.
But the president himself is clearly up for the fight, tweeting overnight about a big R win and saying glad to be of help. Heather Sells, CBN News.
You know, 200,000, 300,000, 500,000 is big money in a congressional off-year race. It wasn't even the general election. But $8 million, it is unheard of. And if you can't win with $8 million, you ain't gonna win with anything. It's just not gonna happen. So to be touting that as some great win, it's not. And you just wonder. So it's one more seat in the House of Representatives. So big deal. And, you know, well, it'll be a black eye to Trump. No, it won't. And it's just ridiculous. But this is the nation we live in, and it's a good nation. Well, in other news, the Supreme Court is hearing its first major case today since Neil Gorsuch was sworn in. It involves taxpayer money and church and state. Mark Martin has it.
Pat, the outcome of this case could have national implications because it raises the question of whether or not a private religious school can get money from the state. Paul Strand brings us the story from Washington.
The other day in the nation's capital, lawyers fought before mock justices in a mock hearing of the biggest religious rights case the Supreme Court is taking up this session.
This mock hearing concerned a case about a playground which just might affect your religious rights.
Missouri was giving grants to nonprofit organizations that had playgrounds to help them purchase a rubberized surface made of recycled tires.
So when kids fall, they don't get hurt.
David Cortman is an attorney with Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, which takes on cases to protect religious rights. He says Trinity Lutheran Church applied, along with dozens of others. Missouri bureaucrats judged them on a number of criteria.
And the church scored among the top 5 and would have been given the grant, but once they read the application, found out that this preschool was run by Trinity Lutheran, they said, separation of church and state. Now, even though you qualified better than almost every other applicant, we're gonna kick you out of the program simply because that you're run by a religious organization.
At that mock hearing, Daniel Mack of the American Civil Liberties Union argued Missouri's own law on church-state matters forced it to decide this way.
The state here actually was not only allowed to deny the funding here, but required to deny the funding.
But Cortman, who's arguing for Trinity Lutheran before the High Court, says the state has nothing to fear here.
There's no religion going on the playground. It's just purely a surface for the kids to fall.
Obviously, there's nothing inherently religious about tire material, but there's nothing inherently religious about a piece of wood, but that piece of wood could be used to build a chapel.
Cortman says the church and parents have told him they're fighting all the way to the Supreme Court, not because of the grant money, but for the principle involved.
Simply because you're operated by a religious organization or your group of religious people, does that mean that because of the so-called separation of church and state or the Establishment Clause, that the government has a right to treat you worse?
And could this lead to much bigger dangers ahead?
So do we say now, well, we no longer want to send the police or the fire department out if the school is run by a religious organization?
One thing about this Trinity Lutheran case, it's going to be the first religious rights case heard by the newest justice, Neil Gorsuch. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
All right, Pat, let's send it back to you. What do you think about this case?
We've been fighting this over and over and over again. You know, there was a member of the Ku Klux Klan who was appointed to the Supreme Court, and he hated Catholics. And the landmark case, he's the one that came up with that separation of church and state stuff, the wall of separation. And it was strictly a member of the Klan, Ku Klux Klan. Now, there's nothing in our Constitution that uses the term separation of church and state. First Amendment says Congress, get it? Congress, that is the United States Congress, shall pass no law respecting an establishment of religion. Period. That's all it says. It does not say separation of church and state. The Russian Constitution under the communists had just those words. The church will be separated from the state and the church from the school. I mean, that was their interpretation. We do not have such a phrase in our Constitution. It has been taken by liberals and used to beat up on Christians, and it is totally inappropriate. And there's the so-called lemon rule that I remember the late Antonin Scalia said it's like a ghoul that keeps returning from the grave, and we need to drive a stake through its heart, because the lemon rule, the lemon case, it had to have a secular purpose and so forth, is just bad law. And now's the chance. I don't believe they've got enough judges that might overturn some of this precedent from the past, but they've got to clarify these issues. And I've talked to somebody about this. I said, let me ask you, assuming that a church is on fire, burning up, are you saying that the city shouldn't send a fire truck around and put water on it, take the fire out? And he said, absolutely not. They shouldn't do that. That's a violation of, quote, separation of church and state. Nothing in the Constitution. Now, a state is privileged to write its own Constitution, but if it varies substantially from the U.S. Constitution, then but anyhow, you'll find out an interesting case, and it might tell you how the new judge is going to be ruling on a number of issues where they begin to have a 5-4 majority like they did under Scalia. Well, Mark, what else you got?
Turning overseas now, Christians in Iraq are returning to their homes in cities that have been liberated from ISIS. And Operation Blessing is there to help them start over. George Thomas has that story.
On a recent trip to the front lines, Operation Blessing's president, Bill Horan, saw firsthand what ISIS did to Iraq's largest Christian town.
I'm standing here on the roof of a church, a historic church in Karakosh, Iraq. This is a community of over 50,000 people. Every man, woman, and child was a Christian that lived in this community.
On August 6, 2014, Christians of Karakosh fled just hours before Islamic fighters overran the area. ISIS practically destroyed the entire town over the next 2 years, turning almost every church like this one into their playground of evil.
Evidently, they didn't have enough explosives to blow it down. They used the courtyard down here for a shooting range. They took artifacts from the church, sacred relics, some of them hundreds of years old, and used them literally for target practice, and expended thousands, tens of thousands of rounds down in this courtyard, practicing how to kill people.
Then, in October of last year, Iraqi troops, backed by U.S. forces, recaptured Karakosh. Months later, residents of the town are slowly trickling back. Operation Blessing is on the ground, helping some families rebuild. This month, the Christian humanitarian organization started the city's first business since its liberation by assisting this family start a bakery to supply fresh bread to people coming home. But many residents are still too afraid to return as fighting rages on less than 20 miles away in Iraq's second largest city of Mosul. For now, the majority of Karakosh's Christians are living as refugees in neighboring Jordan. Operation Blessing is helping them too. The group is feeding over 300 Christian refugee children from Karakosh at their school in Amman.
Most refugees, they don't have means, okay, or resources to feed their children. So many children, they come without any meals having at home. So we stress that they have a good meal at the school.
Father Khalil runs the facility.
Before we start the school, the kids pray with me all together, Our Father in Aramaic, the language of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Operation Blessing also funds a clinic that's helping refugees displaced by ISIS.
And people in America have to be more aware of this and have compassion for our brothers and sisters here. These are all believers in Christ, and we have to do all we can possibly do to help them rebuild their lives.
George Thomas, CBN News.
It's wonderful to see what Operation Blessing is doing all around the world. Pat?
That's just one more example of what happens when you support Operation Blessing. It's a tremendous ministry. Of course, it's a major affiliate of CBN, and it has its own independent existence, but CBN gives it principal support. And so here, it's available on the screen. You can help, and I think it's time to do it. We're going to take what means are necessary to help these suffering people. And they are suffering Christians in the Middle East now that it is unbelievable. Right now it's roasting hot. It will be pretty soon in June and July, and then you have freezing cold winters, and they need all these things. They need shelter, they need blankets, they need food, they need medicine. We're there to help them. And again, Operation Blessing, the address is on your screen. 1-800-700-7000. You can say Operation Blessing, or you can send in a donation. But now's the time to do something. You have an address. I don't see it anywhere. The Operation Blessing address, please, Mr. Director. The website is Operation Blessing.
Can you imagine trying to raise your family 20 miles from ISIS bullets and all
awful.
that fighting? Operation Blessing is there. It's amazing.
It breaks your heart. Where's that address? Come on, give me an address, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Director, I know you've got something.
The CBN address is 977.
I don't want the CBN address. I want the operation. But don't you have a number? I think something. Anyhow,
I don't think we have.
Still don't have it. You've lost it. It's gone?
It's definitely on the web, though. They can just go to cbn.com and get it on the internet.
Operation Blessing at the web org. There you go, Operation Blessing. It took a while. God bless you. All right, Disaster Relief, CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Operation Blessing International. Now's the time to help those people. Now, you know, $100, $50, $20, whatever, makes a huge difference. Thank you, Mr. Director. It took a while, but you got, I knew it was there.